Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Tonight we're continuing our discussion of dictionaries. To review briefly from last time, a dictionary is an alphabetical listing of words and their variants, meanings, and usage. It usually includes these parts: a guide to spelling, usually at the front, an English to other language section, and a language to other language to English section, perhaps appendices on specialized vocabulary, proper names, grammar, and other things. Now, the main types of dictionaries are monolingual dictionaries, such as your basic Webster's or Random House Dictionary of English, where the only language represented is English. Bilingual, which is a two-way dictionary, say from English to Comanche and Comanche to English, for example. And a truly bilingual dictionary is meant to be equally useful for students on either side of the two languages. That is, it would be useful for, say, a bilingual Spanish and English dictionary would be equally useful for Spanish people wanting to learn English and for English-speaking people wanting to learn Spanish. So it's very complete in both of its sections. The kind of dictionary that's most likely to be useful here in Oklahoma for Indian languages is what I'll call a monolingual dictionary with an index. It's sort of a one-way dictionary, but indexed by the English words. So for instance, to go back to Comanche in English, that's probably the kind of dictionary you'd want for that. It has a very detailed Comanche to English section, so you can look up a Comanche word and find out all about it and see examples of its usage. But when you look up in the English, it just tells you what word to look up in the Comanche to find out more about the word. We also talked about prerequisites to dictionary making. You want to make sure that you have a good systematic spelling system that people will be able to use successfully to find a word where they think it's going to be, to know where to look. If you don't have an official spelling system, you need to invent one, at least for the purposes of the dictionary, and then present how it works at the front of the dictionary. Other prerequisites are personnel. You need to have your language authorities, that is the resources who tell you what the words mean. You have to have them lined up and working with you. You have to have a compiler or compilers. This is usually a linguist or someone like that who's very familiar with not only words in the language, but the grammar as well. And you probably are going to want illustrators as well. In addition, another prerequisite would be equipment, and that depends on the type of dictionary you're making. You might just want to have paper and typewriter or computer or something. You may want to have paper and typewriter or computer to do the word processing. You may want to have a computer in the sense that you're doing a computerized dictionary where you, say, click on an object and you hear the word pronounced or something like that. That requires a different type of program and so forth. You may want to have tape recorders or video recorders if you're doing your dictionary in that format, or perhaps a supplementary tape that will go with the dictionary. You may even want a CD burner if you're going to put it on CD through a computer. And finally, we talked about anticipating problems that might come up. One is the spelling, which I already mentioned, especially if there's no official spelling system. You need to get a committee of people from the community together and make sure they accept the system you're going to use and that it's going to be feasible. You may need to use a special font if you're working on computer that will make the characters you've decided you're going to use. You need to anticipate some possible questions about your language authorities. Will people accept them as the authorities on the language and accept what they say the meaning of something is? You need to anticipate possible problems with dialect and genderlect. Genderlect is the different variations of a language, different varieties of a language, depending on whether you're male or female when you speak it. And a number of Oklahoma Indian languages do make some distinctions along those lines. And also the question of what is appropriate language. Do you want to put in dirty words, body function words, disrespectful words referring to other tribes? There are a number of questions that might come up along these lines. And I recommend making a good group decision in a language committee that has the trust of the community when you do this. Other possible issues would be who gets the proceeds from the sales. Assuming you're going to sell your dictionary at some point, it's good to look ahead and decide how that's going to be set up, who will hold the copyright, who will get the proceeds. And finally, in formats, you need to think about what type of format is most suitable for your situation. Do you want it to be just a paper dictionary, perhaps self-published and then Xeroxed at your local Xerox center? Do you want it to be on computer tape or whatever? Or do you want to go to a professional publisher? The requirements will be different in each case. So that brings us up to about where we are now. Tonight I want to talk about the actual process of compiling a dictionary. Let's say you have your authorities lined up, you have someone to help you compile it, you have your necessary equipment, and you've agreed on how you're going to proceed. What next? Well, the first thing I would discuss would be who's going to collect the words. Make sure you discuss this in your meetings as well. Is it going to be one or more individuals? Lots of dictionaries of American Indian languages are based on words collected by a single anthropological or linguistic researcher. And lots of people also have done their own kind of self-made dictionaries where it's just a speaker of the language who sat down and made a listing of words that they thought people needed to know. Just one individual working alone. Sometimes you have teams of 2 or 3 individuals. Another way to do it is to do dictionary committee meetings. You might have your language committee and designate a group within that committee as the dictionary committee. Hopefully this subgroup should be all native speakers, fully fluent speakers of the language, and they would meet separately every so often and just start discussing among themselves what words should go in. I know when there was a Comanche project that worked this way for some time, I think this is continuing in fact, there's a dictionary committee that got together, they had a big potluck lunch on Saturday, and we'd get together and say, okay, what kind of vocabulary are we going to write down tonight? They would discuss among themselves the proper way to say things, the proper translation. And when one speaker might remember a word that the others hadn't mentioned, it was interesting, it would jog the memory of the other speakers, and that helped make the whole thing more complete because the speakers were jogging each other's memories and bringing up words that maybe they wouldn't have thought of just sitting there on their own as an individual working alone. Sometimes students can collect words, and if you're short on money and can't pay anyone to do this work and don't have interested individuals in your tribe, consider getting an intern from the university that would have the skills required to help out. They might at least collect some of the words. Or if you have a language class, you may have a dictionary committee that's doing most of the compiling, but you may also have, say, a class in the Choctaw language if you're working on the Choctaw dictionary, and give the students an assignment of maybe investigating a certain area of vocabulary. I gave this assignment once in our Comanche classes at OU. I had students pick an area such as cooking or gardening or herbs or hunting, different things that we had covered only briefly in class, and ask them to collect another 20, 30 words that they thought would be appropriate within that semantic area. And that was very helpful. We added those to the dictionary that we were making. You might also develop, if you have a dictionary committee, establish subcommittees, one to work on food items, one on hunting, one on traditional dance, and so forth. Decide what the areas are and have small groups work on specific areas. That can be a great time saver. Next thing I would consider in the process of compiling itself, make sure you know what kind of format you're going to use for storing words. In the old days, we used to work with what we called slip files, just pieces of paper or index cards that you would write one word on each, and then all the examples under the heading, you would write examples of how that word was used in different sentences that you'd heard. And that you can get your English Comanche and Comanche English version there by using carbon paper under your paper slip. That's a very low-tech method, but it works, and then you store those in shoe boxes or special file boxes that you might have. Computer files is probably the most likely way that most people these days would want to do a dictionary, and it has a number of advantages. All of the advantages that computers have for word processing really apply very nicely in making a dictionary. Being able to rearrange things, make small changes, make global changes. Suppose you decide you've spelled a word wrong, you want to change it throughout the dictionary and you've already got a 200-page tome. Well, you just tell the computer, everywhere you find this spelling, substitute this spelling. So it can be a great time saver. Other possible formats, as I mentioned before, are audio tape and videotape, and this will, of course, involve a whole separate, perhaps another subcommittee or a whole separate effort. A lot of times people will start just with a paper dictionary, that is a written dictionary, and then later develop supplemental tapes and so forth to go with it. But plan ahead and think about who's going to do what on all of this. Now, actually designing entries. What is typically in a dictionary entry? Well, typically they include or may include pronunciation of the word, or you may just get this from the pronunciation guide at the front of the dictionary. There are 2 ways to do that. But you may have like a square brackets with some indication of the pronunciation next to the word itself. Then usually people will put some abbreviation for the part of speech. Is it a noun or a verb or a preposition or an adjective? Any variant forms, it's good to have a sub-entry for those. So for instance, if you were doing an entry for the English word woman, you might show how woman is used in different sentences, say that it's a noun. And then you might have a sub-entry for forms of the word where, of course, you'd have to list women because that's an irregular plural, and you want to make sure people know that when they start reading about the word so that they don't start saying womans. So any irregularities like that should be listed. Sometimes people also will put in parentheses or in square brackets or something, some indication of the origin of the word. For instance, I'm trying to think which language. I've been working on so many languages lately. In Caddo, there's a word vacas, which means cow, so you might put in parentheses or in square brackets or something from the Spanish word vaca. If you know that kind of information, it's interesting to people. It's good to include that. I would recommend, whenever possible, include the use of the word in a sentence, because a dictionary that's just a listing of words is not nearly as good as one that shows what it looks like when you plug it into a sentence. And any derivative forms like compound forms or irregular forms, as I mentioned before, different tense forms, if that's not automatically predictable, you should list those things as sort of sub-entries too. And it's good to have cross-references. We'll see an example of that in a moment. Let's just take some examples here. I've printed out some examples of a kind of sample entries and how I have proceeded from a word list to the beginnings of a dictionary in Comanche. This dictionary has come a long way since this stage, but I thought for simplicity's sake it'd be good to show you sort of how this will proceed. Let's say that you've made a word list in your language class, which we had in our Comanche class. This was one of the early lessons. And I've extracted some here because I just wanted to keep some very simple examples to show you. So the list was 1 through 30 or something. I've shown you about 10 of them here. So we have dog, which is sari, cat, which is wa'o, horse, which is buku, and so forth. Now I've got the number here just as if I were just taking a computer copy of my word list and I plunk it into a file I call Comanche Dictionary. Let's say that's how we start out. So we would have, of course, not just certain things. We'd have all of our word lists that we have up to date. And but I'm just showing you a sampling here. And they would still have the number and be in the same format that they were on your word list, probably. And what do you do with it then? Well, this is sort of stage one. The next thing I would do with this sampling of words would be to remove the numbers at the left, and also to copy the whole list here, make a second copy of it here. My idea here is that one of these is going to be Comanche to English, and the other section will be English to Comanche. In fact, you'd probably be dealing with much longer lists, and you would have separate files for these two things. But the point is, at some point, you have to copy the list and make sure you have two copies of it, one for each section of your dictionary, one for the Comanche to English and one for the English to Comanche index. So that's the next stage. And next, presuming that you have chosen what kind of format you're going to use, and I suggest looking through a number of dictionaries to come up with ideas for this. Do you want to put your heading in bold? I like to do that. That's what I chose to do. What do you do between the heading and the translation? I developed the format just for my own personal taste and experimentation of putting the bold heading, like the dog in bold print, then 3 spaces, and then the Comanche translation. So as you see, this is developing now. I've taken off the numbers and put the bold headings and put in those 3 spaces instead of whatever I had before between the Comanche and English. And I've done the same thing down here for the other section. Next stage, of course, this is going to have to be alphabetized at some point. The next stage, I've done exactly that. So now we have bird, buffalo, cat, Comanche. Everything's in nice alphabetical order. And in the Comanche, also Hutsu, Kutsana, Nama, and so forth. So people can look things up very easily. Let me go back 1 page. Actually, let me go back 2 pages. I hope this doesn't mess you all up too much in the camera. Notice the last item here. Coyote, it said, the translation given was Kutsana, and then it says in parentheses, sometimes Tsana. So this is a case where you have 2 variants of the same English word. There are 2 ways you can say it in Comanche. And there's some dialectal variation. There's some disagreement among speakers. But you certainly want to mention that coyote is sometimes pronounced Kutsana and sometimes Tsana. And you want to make sure all of this information is included in both sections. Now, when I went to the next stage here, I built myself a little cross-reference. Let's see, not yet. Yes, I did. Well, I did in this section. Tsana, I said, let's say, suppose you look up the Comanche word Tsana. I say, okay, that means coyote. But here's my cross-reference. See also Kutsana. So then the person would go under K, which I haven't added in here yet, but of course you would want to make sure your cross-references actually get entered. So, actually I do, yes. The last 2, I've got Kutsana and Tsana. I've got it listed under both. And each one cross-references the other. That's a good thing to do. It's a very good thing to do. I think that's about what we can say. And this one alphabetizes it. We've got our cross-references. So that's just a very kind of a mini lesson in how to proceed just to go from a word list to an alphabetical listing that looks more like a dictionary and will be more useful to people. They'll be able to look things up easily. Of course, you want to do more than just list words. Let me show you there. I showed a bunch of dictionaries last time, and there's one I didn't. I don't know, Jean, if you'll be able to get this. If not, I'll just read it to you. But there's one very highly regarded dictionary. This is a dictionary of the Cherokee language. The author is Durbin Feeling, who until recently worked for the Cherokee Nation, I believe. He lives out in eastern Oklahoma and is a Cherokee linguist. It's edited by William Pulte, who's a linguist at Southern Methodist University. Anyway, this is a pretty highly regarded dictionary. Let's see if you can get this. Doesn't really matter which one you show. I just want to kind of show how it's set up. There are a couple of special requirements with Cherokee. One is that the traditional writing system for Cherokee is a syllabary. Let's see. Can we zoom in at all on one of these entries so we can see the difference, or is this as close as we can get? In each entry, he lists things according to a kind of alphabetical spelling. Below that, he gives the syllabary. Below that, he gives a sentence illustrating the use of the word in a sentence and in the translation of that sentence. At the very top, where he has the kind of Roman letter listing, he gives the meaning of the word. So each entry has a kind of a phonetic or a Roman alphabet. That's the way it's alphabetized, and so it's got that kind of spelling, then the meaning, then the syllabary, then the use in the sentence, and the translation of the use in the sentence. So it's a really nice presentation. This also is a dictionary that has a nice supplement at the back describing the basic grammar of Cherokee, which is pretty interesting. So I wanted to show you that just to mention the importance of putting in sentences to illustrate the use of words, so that it's one thing to know how to say "sadi," dog. It's another thing to recognize it when it's used in a sentence, to know where to put it in a sentence and so forth. And your dictionary is not going to be the equivalent of a complete grammar, but it's nice to have full sentence examples of everything that will help the serious student just give them more information about how to use the word. A little bit more about sentences, and here I think just because most of you don't speak any one particular language that I could choose examples from, let me just kind of talk from the English and hope that you'll imagine that it's whichever language you choose to think of. Suppose, what I illustrated a moment ago was using word lists and building up dictionary entries from those. But suppose you have some other source of the language which is complete sentences, maybe speeches, prayers, songs, things that have complete sentences in the language. These are great sources for getting words to put into a dictionary. Not just because they include a lot of words, but because they include words that you might not think of asking for as separate items. Let me give you an example from English. Suppose you had some story that included the sentence, "My father went to town on Thursday." Well, basically what you can do is take that sentence and, for starters, you can list it under every word that's in the sentence so that we see an example of "my" used in the sentence, "My father went to town on Thursday," an example of "father" in the sentence, "My father went to town on Thursday," and so forth. So you would want to put it under "My father went to town on Thursday." But what I was mentioning a moment ago is well illustrated by this sentence. The fact that if you work from sentences and not only from word lists, you will get items. It will help you with your completeness. It'll get you items that you might not think to ask on your own. You might not have thought to ask, how do you say "to" or how do you say "on." But if you have a sentence that has an item like that in it and you want to list that sentence under that word, then that helps you get a more complete listing of the actual words in the language. A word like "my" or "his," you hardly ever would use a word like that separately from the word that it goes with. So sentences are a very good source for possessives and prepositions and things like that, little particles that don't normally occur on their own. Let's see, what else could we say about this sentence? The fact that Thursday, we can say this sentence two ways. We can say, just to continue with the English point of view here, but imagine similar things would happen in any language. We can say, "My father went to town on Thursday," or we can say, "My father went to town Thursday." Either one works in English. Both are grammatical. So this is an important kind of sentence to list under the word Thursday, I think, because it shows, okay, this is the name of the day of the week, but this is how you use it in a sentence. If you're saying when something happened, you say "on" plus the day of the week, or you can leave out the "on." So if you have nice example sentences like this, you'll get much more complete entries. There are other concerns about achieving completeness. For instance, completeness of semantic fields. I talked about maybe assigning topics to certain people who would go and research those specific things: cooking, food words, herb words, hunting, war words. Every kind of semantic field you can think of that's important to your culture or that has lots of words in the language, you might think of those and think, okay, have we left out any field? Oh, we don't have anything about colors yet, or oh, we didn't get all the numbers. Try to think in terms of fields of words, groupings of words that'll be important. Also, in achieving completeness, think about dialectal variants. If you've got wa'al for cat, think to yourself, does anyone else say this differently? That's a word in Comanche that is said basically in two ways, either wa'al or wa'al. So you would want to make sure you had listed both of those, because students will hear both of them. And you don't want them to look up a word and think, oh, so-and-so's talking wrong. If anyone that speaks good Comanche or whatever language it is says the word differently, make sure that other variant is in the dictionary too. So try to think that way. And also in terms of gender lex, if your language authorities you're working with are all men and women sometimes talk differently, make sure you go and check the whole thing with women and record any other variations that people might hear when women speak. Okay, further to the process of compiling, that's sort of the nitty-gritty of it. It gets a lot more complicated than what I've just illustrated. My examples are sort of simplified, but that's kind of how you proceed. It's just a lengthy process because a language is a huge, huge thing, and it might take you a lifetime to finish your dictionary. But that's basically how you proceed. But there are a couple of final steps. One is reviewing and editing. Now, some of the things that I've noticed I do a lot in reviewing and editing is I might find that I've accidentally spelled words in two different ways, and then I have to stop and think and check with speakers. Is this because people pronounce it two different ways, or did I mistakenly hear it wrong one day? And you want to check and make sure any changes you make in both the Comanche to English and the English to Comanche section. Make sure it's consistently done throughout the dictionary. Computers are wonderful for this kind of change. Make sure that if you've changed the spelling of the word, you don't only change it in its entry, but in any example sentences and other entries that might contain that word. Check for cross-references. If you've got two variants of the same word, you might want to put in a little cross-reference, see also, and then mention the other word under each entry. Now, final point here is preparing for publication. How do you do that? Make sure you have good quality masters. This is usually a nice laser printout from your computer, and a good clear format, good artwork, and that everything is, kind of camera ready, as they say, ready to be published so that it'll look nice. Now, the last three sections here we have to rush a little bit because we're down to just a few minutes, and I'm only going to just mention these very briefly anyway. One is about publishing your dictionary, the actual publication. Of course, I mentioned before, you've got to think about formats. Is it going to be just in print in a book, or is it going to be audio tape, videotape, and so forth? But in addition, think about the book, what type of book you might want to publish. Do you want to have a fairly large dictionary like this Cherokee one that I showed before? This is a good sized tome, and that's what has worked for this, I think. But we have a number of other dictionaries here. I didn't bring them all back this week, but we have every size from this down to this little Swedish dictionary. This is a pocket format. Now, if you have a dictionary that you think you can render in a format like this, this can be very handy because people can go to the dance or the peyote tent or wherever and then just have this in their pocket and pull it out if necessary, or go to see grandma and pull out the dictionary, not have to carry a book bag or something or think about it being a big deal, just stick it in their purse or pocket. That can be real handy. You might want to do a larger dictionary and then take a selection of the most common words and put them into a little small pocket version like that. That's what people do with English dictionaries quite often. The little pocket dictionaries don't contain nearly as many words as the great big, Webster's unabridged, but they're a nice selection of words that you're most likely to want to look up in a hurry and not have to go to the library or back home to look up in your big book. So think about that. Also, two very important things. One more very important thing to do with publishing is basically issues about copyright. And now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't propose to advise anyone on the legalities of this. All I can say is you want to make sure who's going to hold the copyright and what the community will accept in terms of who holds the copyright. Lots of dictionaries have been copyrighted to linguists and anthropologists, and most tribal communities nowadays are very suspicious of that and don't see any good reason for that to be the case. So they want their language committee or their tribe or someone to hold the copyright. But I do recommend that you consult a professional on copyright matters. Please do not believe what people tell you. Do not believe what you want to believe about copyright. Oh, if I do this, they won't be able to, blah, blah, blah. Ask a professional and make sure you're right. And keep in mind that whoever holds the copyright, that's the person who controls when and whether and how the dictionary will be updated, published, republished, and so forth. It doesn't necessarily say who's going to get the royalties, because one person can hold the copyright and then assign the royalties, that is the cash proceeds, to someone else, such as your language committee or whatever. So I would recommend doing some real professional consultation on this. Two more things. One is distributing your dictionary. Think about the price. You want to charge enough of a price so that you can keep solvent and pay all of your expenses. You might want to even use it as a fundraising thing. But so you might want to up the price a little bit. On the other hand, you want to keep it accessible so that those in your community who don't have a lot of money will still be able to get a dictionary. So think about those issues. Taxes and record keeping are very important. And that depends on who's selling the dictionary too. If it's a tribe, you have one sort of rules, I think. If it's an individual or a nonprofit organization or something, make sure you get in touch with the Oklahoma Tax Commission. See if you need to charge sales tax when you sell it. Think about advertising. And advertising doesn't just mean putting an ad in the paper. It could also mean using your dictionary as a prize somewhere. That'll get the word out. That'll be good publicity for it. And there are free and paid ads, so look into that. Sales venues. If you're going to sell it, look into retail stores, museums, historical societies, your tribe, tobacco stores, the World Wide Web, events such as powwows and Red Earth and Indian Summer, direct mail perhaps. And perhaps through the National Parks and Forests. They always have pretty extensive gift shops which have very good books in them, and they might be willing to sell your dictionary. Finally, for preserving your dictionary, it's good to have it in multiple copies. Back up everything. That's really the strongest recommendation I can make. Don't just have it on one computer and then maybe something happens, a tornado takes away that building and your dictionary is gone forever. Back up everything. Have multiple backups. Have the backups in different buildings and under the control of different people. This is too big of a topic to cover even in 2 shows, but I just wanted to give you a little taste and throw out some things that people don't always think of when they're making a dictionary. Let us know at Intertribal Wordpath Society if we can help you with your particular dictionary project. Call us at our number listed at the end of the show, or write to us at 1506 Barclay Street, Norman 73071. See you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita.